Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. On my recent podcast episode entitled, Why Do Flying Saucers Sometimes Crash?, I ran a poll that asked the question, have you ever encountered an extraterrestrial creature? So far at this point that I'm doing this podcast today, 31 people have responded, and 26 or 83.9% said no, and 5 or 16.1% say yes. Now, of course, not everyone's going to see one of these things, obviously. I mean, so this is a pretty high percentage of no's, and probably that's a good thing. But there is a percentage of people so far that have said yes, that they have encountered an extraterrestrial creature. Now, I know I have. If I were to vote on this, which I have not, it would be 6. I could change that percentage, but I'm not going to do that, of course. This is for people who listen to me and not for me. And I'm going to ask, there's going to be a similar poll for this podcast, if you want to vote on it. It's going to be, have you ever encountered an extraterrestrial creature when you were a child? Now, that question pertains more to what I'm talking about today. And how I really want to talk about how this whole UFO cover-up really has a derogatory effect on children. I really believe that. I've come to the belief that this is not good. Keeping this a secret is not just bad for humanity, for humanity to understand the truth of what's going on, right, with regard to UFOs and extraterrestrial visitation. It's important for all of humankind to understand that, but I believe that some of the people that have perhaps it affects the worst, they have the worst outcome from not knowing the truth are children. I really believe that, and I'm going to make my case during this episode. Now, of course, everyone knows of the aerial phenomenon case, and there was a documentary that came out last year, and I've talked about that documentary. I talked about how excellent I thought it was. And, basically everyone knows the story of people who have been listening to my podcast, because I've talked about this case so many times. People know what happened. I mean, basically over 60 kids back in September of 1994 were on a recess around 10 o'clock in the morning at this aerial school located in Zimbabwe. And over 60 kids, there was more than 60 kids outside, but over 60 of them actually witnessed a flying saucer or saucers. One of them landed, and they also witnessed alien beings exiting this craft. And one of the beings communicated telepathically with several of the children. Now, one of the people that was there, one of the students at the time, was a young lady named Emily Trim. Well, she's a young lady now. She was a little girl at the time. Emily Trim. And she was featured extensively in this movie, this documentary that came out last year, Aerial Phenomenon. And, well, she was one of the people that saw these beings. And these beings actually, this one being was communicating with several of the children that were there. And one of the children that was communicated with was Emily Trim. Now, at the time, if you watch this documentary, there was, it talked about how this affected her. Like she came from a highly religious family that didn't believe in this kind of thing. So when her mother and father heard this, they didn't want her to talk about this, and there's no way that this could happen. Basically, she sees something along with 60 other kids, and all these kids are all saying the same thing. It was, these weren't human, whatever they were alien beings, and they came down. They showed up in a flying saucer. But she had it affected her life from that point on. I mean, it caused friction within her family, and she's never really come to full. It was hard for her to come to terms with this. She's been drawing. She's over the years since this happened. She draws this all the time to try to, as an emotional release, perhaps. But it was a bad effect for her, because again, she wasn't allowed to believe what she saw, because her parents were so religious that there's no way this could be true, and so you can't believe this and that. And next thing you know, that they actually picked up and moved away. Not long after this incident, they all moved to Canada to try to forget this, because this was a no-no in that household. And actually, here is there was a article that I dug up here. It was I'll leave the link for this. It's victorstiff.com. This is a guy who was writing reviews here, and he wrote a review last May of last year on this documentary, and he talked about Emily Trim in this one section. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read the part where he talks about Emily Trim, and you could check out this entire movie review for yourself. I will leave the link for it. It says the documentary gives viewers a lot to process. So Nickerson, the guy who directed the movie, anchors the movie in a few key subjects, chiefly Emily Trim. Trim was one of the school children who witnessed the encounter. Soon after the event, her family packed up and moved to Canada. Nickerson follows Trim as she returns to the Ariel school to help her make peace with her memories. Focusing on Trim further humanizes the story. It's easy to look at the Ariel incident as an exciting event, but for the children who were there, the experience was a burden. They grew up wrestling with feelings of confusion, self-doubt, and fear of ridicule. Some of them buried the incident and refused to share it with their significant others to this day. Trim's presence in the film forces viewers to confront how the event's impact had reverberated through the kids' lives. She processes what happened that day by creating art, and she's produced a body of work inspired by her otherworldly encounter. Trim channels her complicated feelings onto canvases, creating physical depictions of her inner turmoil. It's as close as we'll ever get to being inside these experiencers' heads. So again, this movie is excellent. Again, this was a movie that I highly recommend it. It was directed by a guy named Randall Nickerson, who actually had an encounter of his own when he was a younger person, and which he doesn't talk about publicly, as far as I can tell. Not anymore. He used to, but I guess he was in this case interested him, and it took him many years to put this documentary together. And I highly recommend it. But this is just one of the people, and there were other kids that were featured in this film, in this documentary. Who, they don't tell their, if they, there was one woman who, she got married. She didn't want to tell her husband, it's something you don't want to talk about, because the problem is because it's not accepted as reality in the world. And that's because there's been this ongoing cover-up about the reality of the extraterrestrial presence ongoing since 1947. And this cover-up extends across the world. It's just not accepted. It's just not believed. And when you're a kid and then you see something like this and you have an experience, you're told, no, that's not what you saw, even though you saw it. And when you're a kid, this is something that could confuse a child. And it shouldn't. And when these things happen, if you're a child and this thing you have an encounter with an alien being, it should be, well, yeah, I guess that happens sometimes. There's a such thing as aliens. We don't know what they're doing. I mean, this should be the story that's told to kids. We don't know what they're doing. Our government's still looking into it, but we don't know what they're doing. They seem friendly. Whatever the story is that you have to tell the kid. It would be so much better if this information was, if the governments would acknowledge the reality already. Instead, they continue to cover it up, and it has a detrimental effect on children. And I can tell you this firsthand, and I'll get into that later. But anyway. I just believe that it's one of the biggest, the group of people over the decades who have suffered the most over this. It's not just adults who, of course there's some adults who, when they see something and they report it, sometimes they'll end up losing their job because of this, because, hey, that guy must be crazy. He saw a UFO flying saucer. But a kid has to internalize this and then wonder their whole lives as they grow up, what the hell happened, or what the hell's happening? It has to be worse, actually. Now the incident in Ariel was basically an encounter where a lot of kids saw together as a group saw something. That's one thing, right? But then you have other kids, right? You read enough books about alien abduction, you find out that there's a whole bunch of people out there who first start experiencing this stuff when they were kids. And then who do you go to tell about this? Because nobody's going to believe you. And then when you do go to tell them about it, they're going to tell you, oh no, you must be seeing things, or you're a liar, or maybe you were dreaming, or this or that. They'll give a kid, an adult will give a child a whole bunch of other things that when really in the kid's mind, the kid knows for a fact that something's going on or something happened to him or her. And then the next thing you know, there's nowhere to turn. because nobody believes them, or they're called, they're called liars, or they say, or it was just a dream, or they'll get made. And if more people find out about it, because it's not accepted, because the government hasn't acknowledged it yet, because they have kept the truth from the world to this point. Because of that, they'll get made fun of in school. Other kids who hear this who aren't having experiences or who don't believe this will say, "Oh, that kid's a goofball," or he's screwy, or that kid's weird because he saw an extraterrestrial. That's crazy talk. I mean, there's so many stories like this. But these things happen, and especially when you think about it, it has to be even worse for kids who start getting abducted when they're children. I mean. And I'll say to a parent that doesn't know any better, that doesn't realize that there's extraterrestrial abduction, alien abduction, they don't realize that's a thing, right? Or they don't believe it because they think it's silly, because that's what the news media has been telling them for their whole lives. All of a sudden, their kid comes up to them and says, there was something in my room last night. It took me away, and it looked like an operating room or something, and I felt like I was in a hospital. There was these little guys with big heads, and they were looking at me on a table, and then the parents are like, "Oh, that was just a dream. Oh, that's nothing. No, don't worry about it. That's just a dream." Or you're just telling me a lie, or you're lying. You're kidding me. So then the kid doesn't know and it comes to a point where the kid then all of a sudden just has to shut his or her trap, because they're afraid that they're gonna get in trouble for, quote, lying, end quote, or something to that effect. So it is a problem I really believe that, when you really put all of this into focus, when you really look at the entire cover-up and how it affects different people, of course, as we talk about, there's so many different people who, there's pilots, there's been airline pilots who, like adults, who end up talking about this publicly, and then they end up losing their jobs, or even not publicly, just mentioning it. I've heard stories where a pilot might mention it to another pilot, and the next thing you know, that other pilot squeals on the pilot that had the sighting of a UFO, and next thing you know, the guy's getting tested for getting a mental evaluation. And again, that's because the government hasn't come clean on this. They've opted to keep this a secret from the world. I think it's I don't know which governments. I'm not sure if there's a lot of governments throughout this world. There's a lot of different countries in this world. I don't think all countries, right, understand that there's I don't think all countries are studying this in secret. I think there's only a certain group of countries that are studying this. I think it's the United States. I think it's mostly the bigger countries that are studying this in secret. And it's probably, there's most certainly agreements with some of the smaller countries, and they're brought into it too. And they're all told, hey, we got to keep this secret because of this reason and that reason and this reason and that reason, because the weapons manufacturers who we're dealing with, they're trying to reverse engineer this, because we want to take over the world at some point. And this would be a great way to do that. If we reverse engineer this stuff successfully, then we could reproduce all these flying saucers and other alien technology objects, and we could take over the world. That's more important. That's more important rather than just letting the world. At least they could at least tell the world the truth, though, right? So at least some of these, because again, while there are adults who suffer from this, from when they have sightings and they report these sightings over the decades. I mean, I'm not sure I don't think it's as bad these days because of what's been going on the last 5 years, because of it seems like the government's coming clean a little bit, but still we're still not there. We still don't have that disclosure, and because of that, there are some people who will, if you say you saw a UFO or an alien being, and you say that at your place of employment, what might happen? You might get made fun of. Some people might believe you. Some people might be okay with that. But, who knows? You might be getting brought in for a mental evaluation. You just don't know. You don't know how it's going to be. How some people look at it differently. But there are the other people that we forget about here are the children that deal with this stuff. The children who get abducted or have experiences when they're see something, and then they tell people about it, and everyone thinks, because it's not accepted, because right now it's not been, quote, proven, end quote. Because of that means they must be silly, or they're goofballs, or they're weird, So they get made fun of in school, and how all other kids can be cruel, as the old saying goes. But anyway, I was talking to somebody recently, and I can't use this person's name, but there was a story, and this was something that happened in the 1950s to this person. And Anyhow, this person, I guess we'll call her Teresa. Okay. Now, when Teresa was a little girl, there was a couple of things that happened. Now, Teresa doesn't know. She's not aware. She doesn't know if this has anything to do with extraterrestrials, right? But I think it might have. I've come to the conclusion that maybe aliens were involved because there are very strange things that happened, and I will lay these things out because again, this was in the 50s, so in the 1950s, this was a new thing. It was only people were only seeing flying saucers since 47. It didn't start getting talked about till 47. So this was sometime in the mid to late 1950s when this person was about 9 years old. And so Teresa, there was a couple of different things that happened, very strange things. One of the events that happened was she lived in a house with her mom and dad and her brothers and sisters. And one night, late at night, she heard noises coming from the kitchen, strange noises. It sounded like all of the utensils, the forks, knives, and spoons inside the drawer were just shaking, like rattling loudly. And it just kept on doing it for a while. And she was so afraid. She didn't know what to do. She just laid there listening. She thought maybe somebody broke into the house. But then on another occasion, something really strange happened. The one night she woke up in the middle of the night and it was late. Everyone in the whole house was sleeping. And she heard she heard this strange music coming from outside somewhere. She couldn't identify what it was. It wasn't any kind of music that she ever heard before or since. It was like it wasn't any kind of orchestra kind of music. It was more like electronic tonality type of a music, and it was scaring the hell out of her. And she had no idea where this was coming from or what it meant. It's in the middle of the night, in the 1950s, and you're hearing this strange music that, for one thing, just didn't jibe with the times. It was just out of place, whatever kind of music this was. And she never forgot this music. She can't describe it today. I've just talked to this person recently. She can't describe she's never heard anything like it before or since. But anyway, what the strange part was that she got up. She got out of bed. This scared her. This was scaring her so badly that she felt like she needed to wake her mom up. So she went in her mom and dad's bedroom, and she's trying to wake her mom up, and her mom's not waking up. She's shaking her, she's yelling at her, and her mom's just laying there. The father's not waking up. Nobody's waking up. No matter what she did to try to wake her mom up, she couldn't get her up. And meanwhile, this strange music that she only could describe as music is just going on and on and on. So eventually she gave up. She couldn't wake her up. It was like she was completely conked out. No response whatsoever. So she snuck back to bed. She crept back to bed and she just laid down, just laid there and eventually fell asleep. Now, it's not that, this Teresa's mom wasn't a drunk or anything like that. I mean, there was normal people living a normal life back in the 1950s. And for whatever reason, in the middle of the night, despite how hard she tried, she could not wake her mom up. And this music just continued, and then she just fell asleep eventually, scared out of her mind. Now, there was a case that I dug up that's somewhat similar to this, where music is involved. Now, again, this was a child when Teresa was a child and this happened. Again, there was no connection made at the time that this might be extraterrestrial. In fact, I don't see how it could have. I mean, even if the government had been upfront right from the beginning in 1947 about Roswell, even if the government was upfront about that it suspected that these things were from another planet, even if that were true back in the 1950s, they still wouldn't have made any connection because nobody really knew anything back in the 50s about alien abductions or anything like that. And it's very possible that maybe Teresa was someone who got abducted as a child because there were some strange things like what I just described going on sometimes. But there are some cases. There's another case I dug up. This was one of the cases from Ted Phillips. He was a guy that used to do research into physical trace cases. Like he would investigate compile different lists of different cases that involved actual evidence of when craft land. And here was a case from 1952 in Little Spring, Tennessee. And by the way, I just want to say, before I even say this, the case that happened that I was talking about with regard to Teresa, it was something that happened in a small town in Pennsylvania. But anyway, this other case is from June 1952 in Little Spring Creek, Tennessee. And I will leave a link for this website that has this listed too, so you can check this out. It's on a website called project1947.com. Anyway, so in Little Spring Creek in Tennessee in 1952, this is what some of the physical trace evidence was. It was marks of legs and a center spike, along with small heelless footprints were found. And here was the case. This was after the fact, and the case involved this. Around 11 p.m., a man hears strange sounds and weird music. Sees a shiny thing on the ground with bright lights coming through an open door. 4 or 5 men who were 4 to 5 to 5 feet tall were dancing and singing in high-pitched voices. The object was aluminum-colored, glowing orange and blue in spots, some of which were too bright to look at directly. Rotating lights on a translucent ball was at the top. Object was on 4 legs, each with a ball at the end and a center spike. Stood 3 to 4 feet off the ground. It was 7 to 8 feet thick at the center, like 2 saucers stuck together. The men reloaded the object, advanced toward witness with things in their hands that looked like guns, but stopped, apparently unwilling to cross a creek. The men, these little aliens I would say, walked up a ramp or steps into the object, which rose vertically in a twisting corkscrew motion, glowing brighter as it rose. Okay. But anyway, I just wanted to point that little story out to show that there are sometimes this weird music that's connected with alien creatures sometimes, and so that's why I think it's possible that this story that I heard from this person Teresa, who I find a very believable and knowledgeable person, and somebody who wouldn't make something up like this. In fact, this story, I heard this a long time ago, and I just had it recently retold to me, and it's the same story I heard years ago. And so I think that that's why I think it could have been a case involving aliens, because of this weird music that Teresa was hearing. And then you see a case like this from 1952. But the thing back in the 50s was, at that time, even had there been disclosure by that point, even if that was the case, people would not have made the connection, I do not believe, at the time, that there was something alien going on. Right? There weren't a lot of stories coming forth yet that talked about people getting abducted by alien beings. I mean, a lot of these stories happen at night, in the middle of the night, where people see them coming into their bedroom and there's nothing that they can do, and then they get taken outside. They get brought into a little room where they're examined, and sometimes there's other things done to them. Like as we talk about, with regard, obviously related to some hybridization program. I mean, that's something else that seems to be happening. But I think what you hear a lot of cases where it starts when people are children. You know, a lot of kids people will remember these weird things as they're kids, and they'll tell people about them, tell adults about them, and they're told that no, that's just a dream, or you're lying, or something to that effect, right? So because nobody believes in it, the adults in their lives don't believe in it, because the adults have been told that there's nothing here, there's nothing to it, because the people in charge of different governments are towing that lie. When this happens, okay, this is how apparently this goes down, according to different researchers like David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, John Mack, different researchers who studied alien abduction. How for a lot of people, it starts as when they're children, and then when they grow up and they have children, then it starts happening to their children. But I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows how it could? Some children, some families, some children within some families, it might start happening to them for the first time, and their children are affected, and the parents were never affected, that they knew of anyway. And then when it starts happening to their kid, they just think that the kids must be having nightmares. Because the governments of the world don't admit this. So the kid ends up going through life confused about what happened and what's going on, and that's what happens. Now, of course, I've talked about my situation when I was a kid, what happened to me, and how nobody believed me. And I'm going to talk about it again here, and talk about how it affected me. I want to talk about it, over the years, as the years went on after it happened, how this affected me and how it wasn't a good thing. It definitely, looking back at it, I was actually thinking about it today, and it did not. It wasn't good. It was terrible. It was something that scared the hell out of me, that I knew for a fact happened, but I couldn't get anyone to believe me, and I just had to keep my mouth shut at some point. Anyhow, how it all started was, at the time, I grew up in this little town in Pennsylvania called Mahanoy Plain, and I lived in this little row house. It was a small house, and there was a lot of kids in it. And this would have been 1977. I was 8, almost 9. And, you know, I shared an attic. Lived in the attic. I shared the attic with my brother Davey. He slept on one side of the attic, and I slept on the other side. In the middle, there were steps that came up, you know, into that room. And on the very top of the steps, there was a light bulb. And a lot of those nights, we'd just leave that light on. You know, we'd fall asleep with the light on, just a lot of the times, you know. Because, you know, when you're a kid like that, I was a kid, I would stay up as late as I could sometimes, reading a book or a magazine or something, and then just pass out. Well, the one night I wake up, and I could hear this loud humming sound, electronic humming sound. It's going on, just consistent, like something like a transformer or something. I don't know how else to describe it. I never heard anything like it before or since. Now, there are some cases like that aerial case where people hear, where people who see a UFO, they describe some kind of humming sound or buzzing sound like bees. That could be what I was hearing. That sound that I was hearing could have been that same thing that night. So I'm hearing this sound, this consistent sound, this would not let up. And then meanwhile, what even more terrifying, there was something standing right beside my bed. Now, I couldn't see this thing, only the shadow of it. I had this thin blue blanket. I'll never forget it. Sometimes I would sleep with a blanket over my head. You know, I felt warmer that way or whatever. So I'm laying there and I could see through the blanket the silhouette of something standing there, and more pronounced was the hand and arm of this thing. Whatever it was, it had like a smallish arm and it had a hand, like a small hand, but it had 3 thick fingers on it. That was it. It was 3 thick digits at the base that came to almost points at the end. It was a very strange looking hand, and it was constantly, it was moving up close to where my face was, and then further away, close to where my face was and further away, just during this whole incident, which lasted for 20 minutes. And I could see, I knew there was something standing there. I could see like there was some shadowy thing standing there, but the thing that I could see the clearest through the blanket was the hand, because it was getting close to where my head was and then further away. During this whole incident, that never stopped. Whatever this thing was standing there, and it was accompanied with this loud humming sound. Now, at the time, I did not know anything about aliens or alien abduction or anything like that. In fact, I don't think most people back in the 70s knew nothing of these things. So I'm scared out of my mind, and I'm laying there watching this thing, and I'm asking who's there, right? And there's no response from whatever this thing is. Who is it? You know. I'm thinking it's a demon or Satan himself. That was the best of my imagination could conjure up at that moment. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was something from hell. I thought something was there to take me to hell or something, because I couldn't figure it out. And so this thing is over me. This thing is standing right by the bed, you know, and the hand is getting closer to where my face is and then further away. And I did not want to see the face of this thing, and so I didn't pull the blanket down. If I would have pulled the blanket down, I would have saw it. But I didn't do that. I was too afraid. But what I did do, my brother was on the other side of the room, so I peeked out of the blanket in his direction. I couldn't see that. I didn't want to look at that thing, whatever it was. And his face was looking right toward me. He was sleeping. His eyes were closed, and he was facing toward me. And I started yelling toward him. And he would not budge. He didn't budge. There was no movement. He didn't move around. Like, none of my screams and hollering did nothing. It did absolutely nothing. He just laid there, sleeping, completely conked out. And meanwhile, not only that, but that humming sound was somewhat muffling my voice, which was so with him not answering, plus this unbelievably overpowering humming sound somewhat muffling my voice. I mean, I was still yelling loudly, but that humming sound was definitely putting a little damper on everything. So I started yelling at this point for my mom and dad at the top, screaming at the top of my lungs for them to come to help me to find out what's the hell, because I didn't know what was there. Nobody came. I'm yelling for them for like 5 minutes straight. Nobody's coming. This whole thing lasted for 20 minutes. Just want to keep that in mind. So just so everyone's clear, this wasn't a dream, and it wasn't some people would suggest. When I talked about this the last time, there was some guy that came on there. Well, I know what this is. This was sleep paralysis. Obviously, no, it wasn't. I actually know what sleep paralysis is. I had sleep paralysis on different occasions when I was growing up, and this was far from sleep paralysis. I was able to move during this whole time. It had nothing to do with sleep paralysis. I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. I'm awake as I am right now. Completely lucid, terrified, and awake. So, nobody's coming. Nobody came. Nobody came to the rescue despite me screaming my head off. So, all I could do was just lay there and look. I'm looking at this thing, wondering what the hell is it? And I could just see the shadow getting closer to my head and further away. And it was a smallish, thin arm. I could see that through the blanket, and I could see the hand, the smallish hand, but it had those 3 digits on that hand. That was it. It came to almost points at the tips. And it was just getting closer to my face and then further away, closer to my face, further away, closer to my face and further away. And then I started praying. All the prayers, I was an altar boy at the time. I was a member of the local Catholic church, which was right near the house. So I started saying every prayer in the book. Every prayer I knew was getting whispered, through the blanket. Oh my God, our Father, all those prayers. Please God help me, please God help. And then there was other prayers, just new prayers I was making up as I'm laying there. Please God, oh my God, please help me. So I'm praying and praying and praying. Sometimes I would close my eyes and open them, and the thing was still there. The sound never went away. During the whole event, nothing ever changed with this. It just, whatever it was doing, it just kept on doing it. And then eventually, somehow, I just passed out. I conked out somehow. And at the height of my fear, somehow I just passed out. It wasn't like a dream where you're dreaming and all of a sudden, oh my God, thank God it was a dream. No, I passed out and I slept somehow. And then I wake up in the morning. This was during the summertime. I believe it was the late summer of 1977. I wake up and it's 9 o'clock in the morning. I wake up and there's nothing there. I think my brother David, I think he was already up and out downstairs and gone. And I'm realizing, oh my God, at first I'm like, I'm looking around the room, there's nothing there, right? And then I run downstairs. First thing I do, I go down, I'm talking to my mom. Hey, this is what happened. I tell her the whole story. And I'm insisting on this, but yet she keeps telling me, oh, you were just dreaming. No, I'm like, Mom, I'm telling you, I wasn't dreaming. There was something in the room last night. There was a sound, and it was a hand, and I'm telling you, there was something in the room. And I'm going over and over this story. I don't know how long I know it was for a while I was trying to convince her. And I actually remember very clearly that day. It was a nice sunny day the next day. I know that. And I remember very clearly at one point during that next day, I remember just like my little brain, my kid's brain, realizing and understanding, nobody's going to believe me. Nobody is going to believe me. I know this happened, but I'm never going to be able to prove it. And nobody's ever going to believe me. There was something in my room last night. I think it was something from hell. And nobody's ever going to believe me. I just realized it. I even with that in mind, later on, my dad gets home from work. He was a construction worker. He'd be gone all day. He comes, I run out to the car and start telling him about it. Same story, it's a dream. It was a dream, nothing to worry about. And I realized that, nobody's ever going to know. No one's going to believe this story. And I went on it wasn't until over 10 years later, like I said before, until I started, realizing, putting two and two together, that this was possibly an alien abduction. It had to be that, right? Well, no, it wasn't Satan, it wasn't hell. I mean, I couldn't understand, actually. When I'm going to church, I'm an altar boy, I felt like I was really good. I was good as I could be at that time in my life. I mean, why would the devil want to come for me in the middle of the night? I'm thinking of these kind of things. This is the kind of stuff that was going through my head. And then there were times, I remember, in the couple of years right after that event, like over the next course of the next 2-3 years, I would think about this privately. I wouldn't really talk about this much. To my closest friends, I would bring it up. The friends I hung out with all the time, I told them the story. There were people who knew me, and they knew I wasn't some kind of a liar or anything, and they accepted the story. They never really made fun of me or anything like that. My close friends, I never really brought it up in school or anything, though. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know I never put two and two together. It took a long time to reach that, to reach the alien conclusion. But yeah, I would sometimes think about it. I remember actually, it scared me so bad when it came to my mind. Like I would try to actually convince myself, well, it couldn't be real, right? But I knew. But the other part of my brain's like, you lying to yourself. That was real. You were wide awake, and there was something in that room. I couldn't, no matter how hard I wanted to get it out of my head and pretend it didn't happen, because I didn't want to believe it happened. I actually did not want to believe it happened. And again, this was during a time in my life where I didn't believe in UFOs. I never really gave any of that stuff any credence at all. I mean, in fact, I saw movies on TV and things like that. I saw the old War of the Worlds from the 50s and movies like that, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I thought it was just all Hollywood fantasy stuff. I never thought that the reason these movies they were putting them out at the time, and they were popular in the 50s, was because of I didn't realize that there was people start seeing UFOs in 47. I mean, you have to understand what things were like back in the 70s. Things were so different back then compared to now. Like younger people, people my age, I'm in my 50s now. And I would imagine there's some people out there my age who remember what things used to be like back then. I mean, information was hard to come by. I mean, basically, I did grow up in an area where there was cable TV, but most people had antennas, right? And that's how they would get their watch TV, with an antenna on the roof, and that was it. And that's all you had. But even though we had cable, you still only had 12 channels. You had 2 through 13, and there wasn't really a lot of choices there. I mean, some of the channels were basically duplicates. I remember we had two ABC channels, one from Philly and one from Wilkes-Barre, like 2 NBC channels, one from Wilkes-Barre, one from Philadelphia. I mean, stuff like that. And you had a handful of New York channels. There was nothing on TV about UFOs all the time. So I guess, looking back, I see that there was some documentaries and stuff that would air occasionally back in the 70s. But I mean, there was no VCRs or anything like that. And if you didn't know what was coming on, or you wouldn't, and at the time, again, I wasn't even interested in that stuff. I never thought about that kind of stuff. I never even considered it being real growing up. And I am certain that my parents never thought about this stuff. They never talked about it. The first time I actually remember my dad, we were watching an In Search Of episode in 1980. And it was about UFO crashes, and they were talking about Roswell, and I was like, I remember looking at it, and I was like, this is real? Like, he was already watching, and I came in and was standing looking at it, and he said, yeah, you didn't know that? And that was like the first time I ever, and I didn't really think much of it at the time. Again, it wasn't until years later, again, I went through all those years not knowing what it was. Imagine this, there was actually a time where this person you're hearing speaking to you right now didn't think about aliens or UFOs, didn't really care. Never even thought about it. It wasn't an interest at all. It wasn't until like somewhere in the late 80s, I believe it was, I saw some show on TV and it was about alien abduction, and then I started realizing, like, it all started coming, like, it didn't happen all at once. I had to think about it for a couple of days. From what I remember, it was like, and I started thinking about that incident that I had when I was a kid. That I know that there was something there, right? I know that there was something there, and I started realizing that's what it was. It was a freaking alien in the bedroom. That's what was going on. I might have been abducted. So that's when the lights came on, finally. It took a while, but the lights came on, and then the interest started. It was in the late 80s once I started realizing this. And then, of course, in 1994, I had saw a UFO along with another witness this time. So at least there was some other witness there the second incident. So then by that, I was really interested then. And I've been interested in it ever since. And I want answers. But see, again, this caused confusion for me. Growing up, this causes confusion, and my case is not even nearly the case the incident that I recall. For all I know, this kind of stuff would be going on my whole life. If I was to get hypnotized, maybe I'd find out I'm a regular alien abductee, and they've been doing this all the time. That was only one of 100 times they came and did something. Right, for all I know, that incident that I recall. But there are people out there, there are other people out there, kids pop right now, right? Over the years, right? Because of this ongoing cover-up, because our governments haven't told the truth to the people who have these things happen to them, or and are more dramatic, way more dramatic than what I recall, right? There's kids that will remember actually getting brought on board, actually seeing the beings face to face, right? The big scary, the big heads with the big scary black eyes, and the parents are like, "Oh, this kid must be dreaming. Maybe he saw a show on TV." You know, again, back in the 70s, if they would have came clean, because back in the 70s, that's when alien abduction was just starting to become a thing. It wasn't until the 80s where people really start talking about it. But back in the 70s, I mean, had the truth been out there, maybe my parents would have be able to put two and two together and say, you know what, maybe it was an alien. And then I would have known at least. At least I would have known what possibly might have happened to me that night. I mean, it's better than thinking it was the devil himself showing up. I mean, what's scarier, I guess? I mean, aliens are scary too, but I mean, I think the devil, I mean, that's a little bit scarier. Especially when you're a kid and you think about things like that. But the problem is that there's other people out there, when they were kids or kids right now, right, who experience these things, and the parents don't believe them. Like, again, back in the 70s, there just wasn't a lot of information out there. But as time went on, by keeping this secret, and as time went on, and the abduction stories start coming out, and the books start coming out, and more people are talking about it. Again, back then, there was no History Channel, Discovery Channel, and all these different channels that we have now that have UFO shows on every night, basically. It seems like there's something on TV every night talking about this. People are more aware of it now. But still, a lot of people might be aware of these shows and the discussion of aliens, but still, they're not sure if it's real because governments of the world are still keeping that from them. And people who suffer the most from it, I believe, are children. Because when these things happen to them, their parents aren't going to immediately understand what it might be. When a kid says, "Hey, this is what happened to me," I'm telling you, it wasn't a dream. And the parents are, "Oh, it must have been a dream. You're lying," or whatever. So that's why I believe it's the people, the group of people who are affected the worst from this are children. I really believe that. I think children are affected the worst because they have no idea what's going on. Their parents are clueless because the government won't share any kind of information about what they know, what they've discovered, what they have uncovered for all these years. The mainstream, for the most part, doesn't accept the reality of extraterrestrials being here, when they are in fact here, right? Because again, I saw one of them. It was in my freaking bedroom, right? I didn't know it at the time. It took a long time to figure it out. I lived this life of wonder and concern and wondering maybe I'm crazy. I even thought that when I was a kid. I was like, I wonder, I hallucinated or something and I'm going crazy. But I knew I didn't. I knew it was real. I knew that there was something there. And I know that there has to be. There's no question about it. I mean, look at watch that movie, Aerial Phenomenon. Watch that movie. Watch that documentary if you haven't already, and you'll see how it affected different people. No, they're adults now. They were kids back in 1994. These are all 30-somethings now, and they had their whole lives to think about this and no answers really. And well, again, a lot of them didn't want to talk about it with anybody because they didn't want anyone to think they're crazy. They didn't want to get made fun of. I mean, there's so many different stories too, where a family will see. I remember there was a one In Search Of episode. I can't remember the name of the family. There was some family out in the Midwest somewhere that a UFO landed right in the road near their house in the middle of winter, and they all saw it, and then the thing took off, right? And those kids at school found out about it, and they teased them. All the kids in this family were getting teased. Hey, you're weird and all this kind of stuff. See, but it wouldn't be so weird. Kids wouldn't get picked on, and kids would not get picked on if the government had come clean, or if they come clean finally, right, about what's going on with extraterrestrials. Kids wouldn't get picked on. Kids wouldn't think that, wouldn't be afraid, or wouldn't be afraid of getting called a liar, wouldn't be afraid of, wouldn't have to go internalizing real things that happen to them, but they're afraid to tell anybody because they're afraid no one's going to believe them, because they tell their parents and their parents don't believe them, and so I guess I can't say anything. It's just terrible. This is a terrible thing. That this cover-up has caused nothing but pain and heartache for children over the decades, and it causes confusion, and who knows what other kind of issues it causes people. I mean, again, my incident was not nearly as dramatic. Say there's some kid that's has to deal with this on a regular basis, constantly getting abducted and crying to the mom and dad, and the mom and dad doesn't know whether or not it's really happening, and they don't believe. Maybe they're not sure if they really believe him. See, if the government came out and said something like, "Hey, it's possible. It could. There are aliens, and alien abductions seem to be something that's happening." Then the parents, at least they're not afraid to accept the reality and tell their kids, yes, I'm sorry, but it looks like these beings are coming to you, and they're not. We don't think they could say something like we don't think they're going to hurt you. I mean, that's all you can say, because we really don't know what they're doing, right? But you could tell a kid, hey, we don't think it's real. There's nothing to worry about. It doesn't seem like they hurt anybody. So if it happens again, just let us know, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll just move on. See, it wouldn't be as something that anybody would have to worry about. If there were no stigma hovering over it, it wouldn't be something that parents would have to be afraid about thinking of or admitting to themselves that something like this might be happening to their kid. Anyway, I guess it's just another aspect of this that people don't really talk about, is how this affects children and children who have to deal with it on a regular basis. There's kids out there, I can assure you, right now, there's kids out there that are dealing with this, and there's probably parents out there who don't believe them. I'm sure that there's some parents out there that do believe them. And I'm sure there's some parents out there who they grew up dealing with this, and now it's passed on to their kids, because that's how it seems it happens sometimes. So I just think, again, because our governments have decided to keep this a secret just so they could develop super weapons in secret without anyone knowing what they're up to, keeping this gigantic, important information away from the public, right, for all this time, just so they could make weapons, basically. That's what's going on here. And guess who suffers? All the kids of the world. How many kids? We don't even know. How many kids are actually affected? Some kids probably don't even know it's happening to them. But I'm sure that there are a lot of kids who do know that there's something weird going on. But it's hard for them, because, again, it's something that's not accepted in the world. So the kids actually have to go through this, internalize it for their whole lives until they grow up, right? Maybe then they'll talk about it. A lot of times they don't, because they're afraid people will tell them they're nuts. But again, it's a shame that this is happening, because it is real. It's real, and I know it for a fact, because I encountered one myself. So right now, there's kids out there who are dealing with this and suffering for it, and it's going to affect them their whole lives. And for some cases, it's going to be very derogatory for them. It's going to have a derogatory effect on their lives. Anyway, until next time.